If there's one thing we've become accustomed to here in the 2020s, it's the possibility of wrestling shows being compromised by events outside of a promotion's control. Not even just the idea of being forced to run without spectators, but also the chance that some, if not many, advertised performers may be unable to attend through basically no fault of anyone's. Today, we think of viral matters playing havoc with live television production, but one time, a much different disaster put WWE in a rather tricky spot, one without much protocol in place for dealing with. And while the ramifications weren't long-term in any real way, the tale is nonetheless a unique one. I'm Jack from Cultaholic Wrestling, and this is the true story of WWE versus the Volcano. It was a post-WrestleMania 26 world, and WWE was kicking off with a new season, so to speak. And because it's WWE, that new season kicked off with rematches galore. The forthcoming Extreme Rules pay-per-view was an 8-match card that included 4 direct rematches from WrestleMania. John Cena versus Batista, Edge versus Chris Jericho, CM Punk versus Rey Mysterio, and Triple H versus Sheamus. You know, the typical loose-end tying that WWE does when firmly blowing off WrestleMania feuds. Something else that's fairly typical of springtime WWE is international touring. Twice a year, on the regular, WWE jets off to Europe for an extended spate of shows, one in the spring and one in the autumn. You can practically set your watch to WWE hauling out the red phone box and the old-timey taxi cab for the entrance set of the England TV tapings. I mean, yes, they're stereotypes, but at least something's coming home, I guess. April 2010 was no different. Not even a week and a half after WrestleMania 26, the Monday Night Raw crew were whisked off to Vienna to kick off their half of the European tour. And after filming SmackDown in Illinois, the Blue crew made their own cross-Atlantic trip, kicking off their portion of the tour in Berlin. Both brands were to spend over a week abroad, each filming TV in London the following week, before concluding the weekend of April 17th and 18th. In fact, April 18th was scheduled to be WWE's first ever event in Turkey, running in Istanbul. Following the planned Istanbul card, the Raw crowd would have already arrived home, where they would perform in East Rutherford, New Jersey for the April 19th Raw taping. SmackDown would then make it back for their Tuesday taping in Connecticut, and then after 4 days off for each brand, both would convene in Baltimore for Extreme Rules, blowing off most of those WrestleMania feuds and beginning the ease into all of the summer programs. And you know, all of this sounds fairly routine, but of course, because you're watching a video on this topic, and because you've already heard me say the title, you know that a significant complication would arise. Beginning at the end of 2009, at the southern brim of Iceland, an ice-capped volcano called, okay, I'm gonna give this my best shot, Eyjafjallajökull, started to experience seismic activity. Over a period of 3 months, the activity slowly increased, ultimately leading to a small eruption on Saturday, March 20th. The eruption continued into April, where on Wednesday 14th, the eruption created a cloud of ash that began enveloping much of Europe. By the weekend, the ash cloud covered most of the northern 2/3 of this lovely continent. The hazards obviously posed to aircraft led to the sheer majority of flights to and from Europe being cancelled, leading to what some cite as the largest volume of disrupted air travel in about 60 years. Seeing as the WWE roster was hitting up many major European cities on this split crew tour, and considering the ground they would have to cover to make these towns, you can imagine the difficulties they were all about to face. After performing in Strasbourg, France on Wednesday the 14th, the Raw crew had a 330-mile trip to the French city of Liévin, where they'd be working on Thursday, and I felt really clever doing that pronunciation, but I have no idea if it was actually correct. Ordinarily, this would involve taking a veritable puddle jumper flight so they could check into hotel rooms, get a reasonable amount of sleep, and then continue resting up before heading to the arena for the matches. That would have been on a normal day, but you know, flight kind of wasn't possible right now. So what to do? Well, you hop aboard a bus for a 6-hour ride. That's what you do. It was not ideal, but the Raw crew did what they had to do. They took the bus for 6 hours and got into Liévin, where they held a 7-match card for the locals. The men and women of the Red brand were most assuredly tired, cranky, and perhaps staving off the urge to be combative, but then again, that's the life of a weary traveler sometimes. I mean, it could be worse, right? And it was! The trip to the Friday show in Belfast made a 6-hour bus ride look like a hop, skip, and a jump. According to The Miz, to complete the 644-mile trip to Belfast, which involved navigating the northern goddamn Atlantic, the Raw crew took a 2-hour bus ride, followed by a ferry ride, and then another 7-hour bus ride, then another ride on a ferry, and then a 3-hour bus ride into the lovely city of Belfast. And if you think that's wild, check out Chris Masters' itinerary. He travelled all that way over the span of half a day, only to have his sole involvement on the card being getting jumped by Sheamus on the way to the ring. No No match, no segment, just getting jumped by Sheamus, and that's pretty much it, really. Whatever pays the bills, I guess, and I hope he slept like a baby afterwards. Actually, Masters would have plenty of time to lounge around and catch up on sleep, as would the rest of the Raw roster, because none of them were going to be wrestling for the next 9 days. There were no airports operating in Ireland, and barring another string of bus to ferry endeavors at warp speed, there was little chance of the roster reaching a functioning airport to catch a flight back in time for that Monday's Raw in northern New Jersey. The Raw crew was stuck in Ireland for the foreseeable future. Meanwhile, the SmackDown crew just finished their own Friday night card in Zurich. Their next scheduled event was Innsbruck for that Saturday, but, as has become a bit of a common phrase in modern wrestling, plans changed. WWE cancelled these planned cards in Innsbruck and Istanbul as well, because the SmackDown crew was now being tasked with pulling off Mission Impossible. With the Raw brand wrestlers unlikely to make it back to America until after Monday, the SmackDown crew was going to pinch hit in their place, or substitute in for the English among us. Yes, SmackDown were going to be working that Monday's Raw in their place, if they could get back to the States in time, that is. The last major airport in Europe still allowing flights was in Madrid, because Spain was just southern enough to not catch the brunt of the ash-filled air in the early going. However, there was a deadline. According to then SmackDown star Chris Jericho, they had until 10:45 on that Saturday night, about 24 hours away, to get to the Madrid airport so that they could fly back to the States in time for Raw. Jericho says that no flights were allowed after that time, so once the Zurich show was done, they had to get to Madrid. And it should be simple enough, just a casual 1,000-mile, 18-hour drive as they raced against the clock. At least this time, there weren't any ferry trips involved. And at least the bus was a luxurious one, as Jericho remembers. With first-class accommodations, the arduous trip could at least be taken with a heavy degree of comfort. For a little while, anyway. According to Le Champion, the bus only travelled 3 of the 18 hours, taking the roster as far as the city of Geneva. For some reason, the bus couldn't take the SmackDown crew any further, and it would have to be another bus that brought Jericho and co. into Madrid. The new bus was not only not luxurious, but it was so small that not everyone was going to fit. As Jericho remembers, a number of individuals had to be left off the bus, including numerous backstage crew members, as well as the tag team of the Dude Busters, Kalen Croft, and Trent Barretta. Yes, that Trent Barretta. Somehow, you just know that Sue was there to pick them up in the nick of time. And anyway, compared to this new bus, Sue's people carrier would have been practically first class. The wrestlers, including Kane, Rey Mysterio, R-Truth, Drew McIntyre, and others, were tightly cramped like muscular sardines, with 15 hours of travel still left to go. Jericho even claims that Edge was on the phone with John Laurinaitis asking for his release. All the while, the rickety old bus was apparently creeping slowly through the French Alps and wasn't really able to move much faster. From the sound of things, this bus apparently topped out at about 45 miles an hour. So, slow bus, cramped bus, what could possibly be worse? How about broken down bus? The bus almost overheated right in the middle of the mountains, and unless they could find a stranger in the Alps to quickly fix it, then Triple H, one of the few active wrestlers that didn't make the trip, would have been renting from Ring of Honor's locker room for just one night of Raw. For a while, it seemed as though the deadline wasn't going to be made. Jericho and others were in contact with Laurinaitis, updating him on their whereabouts and situation. By 1 p.m. in the afternoon, the group was still nearly 350 miles away from Madrid, and the bus wasn't moving any quicker. At 8:30 that night, it was coming down to the wire. There were about 45 miles to travel in 2 hours, which doesn't seem so bad for a normal mode of transport. But, as has been explained, this bus, which you'll remember nearly broke down earlier in the day due to overheating, was sluggish enough to create some unwanted drama. Finally, just as the hands on the clock crept up on 10 p.m, the airport was in sight. With nearly 45 minutes to spare before the flight was no longer possible, the SmackDown crew had made it to the promised land. Sort of. According to Jericho, the bus driver screwed up trying to find the airport entrance, took a wrong turn, and spent nearly 15 minutes trying to get back onto the main road, until finally, at 10:20 p.m. local time, the bus pulled into the departure section of the airport. The wrestlers and crew took off running through the airport concourse, navigating an obstacle course of sleeping travelers on the floor. At 10:32, the SmackDown gang got through customs, got their luggage, got onto the charter flight, and scrambled to their seats. As Jericho remembers, when the flight lifted off, his phone said 10:44 p.m. They had just made it. While the Raw crew remained holed up in Ireland, the SmackDown stars were bound for the United States, where they would be the ones working on Monday night. And the Raw taping in New Jersey was, understandably, a bit of a strange one. It began with Triple H monologuing about the recent events that compromised WWE's plans before he was suddenly interrupted by CM Punk, Luke Gallows, and Serena Deeb. Now remember, this was 4 years before Punk told Triple H, "I don't need to wrestle you, you need to wrestle me," so Punk's remarks here were less barbed and more in line with his straight-edge testimonials of the day. TNA. Lillian Garcia made a guest appearance to fill in as ring announcer, having left the company the previous September. A little bit of controversy ensued as well when Triple H made an offhand comment that night that many, including Mick Foley, interpreted to be a dig at Garcia and how the game felt about her physical appearance. On the night, only 4 matches took place, and what an eclectic quartet it was. A young Drew McIntyre, the reigning IC champion, defeated Matt Hardy in an opener that only went 3 minutes. This was followed by an open challenge for the World Heavyweight Champion Jack Swagger, and to everyone's surprise, it was answered by semi-part-time Undertaker, 3 weeks removed from retiring Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania. The two went on to have a very good 16-minute non-title match, won of course by the Deadman. But not all of this Raw was going to be sneakily good, because some of it was just plain bad. Actor Will Forte was on hand to promote his upcoming movie MacGruber, which featured a number of WWE stars in bit parts, and the guest host ran afoul of Vladimir Kozlov. This led to a dreary handicap match in which MacGruber and a similarly dressed Great Khali defeated Kozlov via countout. You might believe that the guest host era of Raw hasn't aged all that well, but let me make this clear, it sucked back then as well. Finally, to close out the night, Triple H, Rey Mysterio, and Edge defeated Punk, Gallows, and Jericho in what basically felt like a feel-good house show main event. Not the greatest Raw of all time, but it was arguably the best show WWE could have put on under the circumstances. SmackDown had done good in the Raw roster's place. So how did the saga end for the Monday Night Raw crew? Well, there were more ferry rides in everyone's future as the talent and staff took ferry and bus trips from Belfast into Scotland, where they were able to gain clearance to fly out on Wednesday, April 21st. But even that couldn't be the end of it, as another plume of ash rerouted the flight, causing a 2.5-hour delay. Ultimately, the Raw brand made it back to the United States at last, flying home safely into Connecticut. And speaking of Connecticut, the SmackDown crew filmed their tapings there that Tuesday night without any issues. The two brands met up on Sunday in Baltimore for Extreme Rules, with the entire ordeal behind them. While the grounded European flights didn't play havoc with the structure of any of WWE's actual angles to any bothersome degree, the championship scene in another company was adversely affected by the Volcano. The TNA X Division champion at the time was the English Doug Williams. He was scheduled to defend the title at the Lockdown pay-per-view in St. Louis on April 18th in a 3-way cage match against Frankie Kazarian and Shannon Moore. However, Williams was unable to fly in for the pay-per-view due to the travel restrictions and was therefore forced to vacate the belt. Homicide ended up subbing into the match, which was won by Kazarian, and when Williams was finally able to get back to the States, he challenged Kazarian for the title he never lost and was able to win it back at May's Sacrifice pay-per-view. On WWE's tour of Europe that November, the Innsbruck and Istanbul shows were made up, meaning that Turkey finally got to bask in its first ever WWE event. In the main event of that card, Bret Hart competed in what is technically his second last match ever, teaming with Edge and Mysterio to beat Drew McIntyre, Alberto Del Rio, and Cody Rhodes. The travel woes scenario is an uncommon one, but one that WWE fans came to be quite familiar with in recent times, when the NXT locker room was suddenly drafted in to fill out a SmackDown card in Buffalo back during those charming few weeks when NXT was considered the third brand as opposed to the safe house from the main roster, and that's probably not going to continue much longer either, really. And thank God for the NXT brand, because that plane carrying the Raw and SmackDown talent out of Riyadh was beset with mechanical issues. And seeing as those issues took 24 hours to fix, boy, they must have been some really bad mechanical issues, yeah? While that Saudi Arabia episode is a rather contentious tale, this one's a little more lighthearted by comparison. Wrestling promotions have been tasked with making the best of bad circumstances on many occasions. In this one, WWE had to deal with a volcanic eruption, increasingly restricting airspace, a road trip from hell to reach the last available airport, fighting off sleep, frustration, anger, and the knowledge that if they did make it back to the States by Monday, they'd have to share the stage with one of the guys from that hideous Brother Solomon movie. What started routinely as one of WWE's biannual European tours proved far more noteworthy than anybody could have anticipated. And in the globe-trotting, sometimes chaotic world of WWE, it almost maybe felt like just another day at the office.